Good evening. So, I wanted to do a review of a short video from TRT World. I'll leave the link in the description, and you can go and visit their site, a Turkish broadcasting service, and they've been pretty heavily involved since October 7th in covering the Palestinian genocide, and a footnote to that that same structure has been transferred over to Lebanon, and it seems that there's no real common sense in that's walking into salvage anything at all to do with Israel and its apartheid ideology. It's usually the case with such institutions, similar to South Africa, but much worse and entrenched in many different ways than the South African situation. South Africa was connected to a much broader colonial project, and it was more diluted, I would say, as far as like a cultural nationalist situation. And of course, Britain wasn't declaring South Africa its native land, backed by the Bible and Christian or Catholic nationalism. So Israel is South Africa reloaded in a shotgun that has 12 barrels. So it's a very different. You can somewhat compare their apartheid systems and fascism, and the idea of occupying a people and suppressing them, both physically and moralistically, in the sense of immorality, not in the sense of applying morals. And so this video sparked a few things for me, and I feel like honoring the Palestinian plight tonight by doing a review, not a react. I guess between review and react, there's a fine line, because you can use the word react pretty loosely these days, but usually people are looking for sort of knee-jerk reactions, and that's not going to be something that you'll find here. So my objective is to anchor in and provide a kind of a foundation to stand on and practice one's acquired knowledge and sense of dignity, morals, individualistic autonomy and sovereignty to the mind that sits on top of your shoulders. Zionism started very early on paper, 1897, early 1900s. Ultimately, it's a capitalistic military industrial complex phenomenon where capitalists and military conquest, which they're completely joined at the hip like Siamese twins, they use religion to justify their individualistic, counterintuitive to religion aims and ambitions. And it's been done before. It's quite common. That somehow, and I think it just goes to show that religion is in some ways it's sort of schizophrenic in a way. Like it's more pliable than maybe a righteous person who is isolated from the big picture would even care to believe or entertain. Religion is a very cognitive dissonant phenomenon when it involves more than one person. Sometimes when it involves one person, I mean, there's justifications that the ego gives out, and with a lot of magical thinking, finds ways to manipulate scripture to meet its dysfunctional relationship to morals and ethics and principles, and humanity at large. It's kind of like a psychopath who goes to ministry school and learns through the lens of psychopathy how to teach a holy word that is ultimately unholy. And of course, the Bible has a lot of propaganda in it as well. And of course, it doesn't really do itself any favors sometimes, because there's things in the Bible that are contradictory to itself. A forgiving God who was once a jealous God, for instance. And you can't be jealous and forgiving. It's a very unstable situation. And you've got a lot of things going on in the Bible that lends interpretation. But that's human. And I feel like when you get down to the nitty-gritty of truly what religion aims to do, beyond all the side stories that you can interpret and go against religion with, it's pretty simple stuff. I mean, in the sense of there's not much gray area when it comes to do no harm. It's so I would say, in short, you've got a situation where the capitalists and the military-industrial complex and the bankers and the shareholders and the stock markets, they stay away from the core of religion, and they march in a circle around the gray area, the outer ring, like the asteroid belt of its main nucleus, and that's where they get their stories and their justifications, ultimately through more human what would you call it, like a more human involvement in interpretation and events and compromises that biblical figures made under duress of their own egos to kind of have their cake and eat it too, and do things in the name of, but those things weren't in the name of, they were in the name of the person doing them. So it's a kind of a level of denial and sort of escapism in a way, like definitely propaganda when you have a religious war. I mean, already the phrase religious war is propaganda. So here we go. We're going to jump into this. It's 8.5 minutes long, so I'll definitely get through this.
Zionism.
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 A political movement, an ideology, or an ethno-nationalist vision based on supremacy. To understand it, we go back to 1897, the birth of Zionism. Before Israel existed, a group of European Jews gathered to develop a vision that would change history.
Zionism is a movement that started around 150 years ago. That's just really recently, relatively recently. And it's a movement of people who were totally estranged from the Jewish religion. They weren't practicing the religion as a whole.
The founder of Zionists, his name was Hedges from Vienna, Austria. He don't believe in God. He don't believe in nothing. The Judaism is completely a religious movement, have nothing to do with any nationality, with any materialistic thing.
Zionism.
So something to keep in mind, that last speaker, the ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel, I won't go into the dissonance of their existence there. It must be a tough way to live. But ultimately, they're anti-Zionists. And I guess one could say that their conviction is that it's best to stay in the place that they oppose and work against it, and try and remind people, try to sound the alarm bells the best they can. But it's still, if you kind of pan out, it's sort of an irony that doesn't really resolve itself, because there's so many other contradictions involved there. It creates a lot of confusion for people who don't know a whole lot about this situation, but ultimately, I get it. You know, it's like a form of activism in a sense, and yet at the same time, it must be confusing for citizenry as well, because you've got anti-Zionists living in a Zionist apartheid state. And so there's I guess I would say in the private thoughts of an outside observer or a young person or someone visiting Israel, it gives it an air of authenticity, and there's nothing authentic about Israel other than the archaeological sites, which Zionism also exploits and propagandizes for their needs. Another point is that there were a lot of atheists in the formation of Israel, in the high bureaucracy of Israel. So just plant that in your thought garden, right dead center, and think about the implications of that. That's already a non-starter as far as convincing me that Zionism has anything to do with Judaism. It's very important to understand that Zionism has absolutely no religious principles or moral boundaries or ethical priorities. Absolutely none. And you can see this in their policies. You can investigate Israel's Hannibal doctrine, their Samson option, the fact that they are an apartheid state and has been since its inception. Apartheid is cooked into their statehood documentation and bylaws. I mean, it's all there. So as this situation gets older, and it's starting to happen, a lot of people resisted it in the early years of the genocide, but it's starting to soak in. There's a lot of hard cranial substrates in America and also Britain and Canada, but in the countries that have ancestral trauma around colonialism, it doesn't take any time at all. They completely get it immediately. They may not mass protest right away, but they get it. Northern Ireland gets it, which has become a kind of safe haven for high-profile Palestinians fleeing Gaza. I mean, I'm not talking about thousands, but specific people are being adopted, so to speak, by Northern Ireland. And the British are still in Northern Ireland. So there's a deep empathy in Ireland for Palestinians. And they've also been at the forefront of activism towards Palestine, giving them support and bringing people to understand the situation and be aware of it for a long time, because there's a resonance there, and it goes to show you that ethnicity is this whole ethno-class warfare is it's just entertainment for the ego. A pastime. It has no real there's no victory in its practice. It fails as quickly as it succeeds. So Zionism really got ramped up after World War II. A lot of anti-Semitism in Europe. So keep that in mind as well. And there were Jews that came in on ships that were redirected away from American shores, by the way. There were instances of that based on the anti-Semitism of the American president at the time, Churchill. And so Churchill and Donald Trump have a lot in common, by the way. If you ever want to dig into that graveyard of dysfunction and misery. The state of Israel was not what it was called in the documentation. It was called a home. And that was just smoke and mirrors, because if you look into the deeper early paperwork of the Zionism, they clearly state, and these are papers that you can tell that they were typed out on an old Royal typewriter. You know, they're not block print like newspapers were. This thing was typed out, and the authenticity has never been disputed by scholars all across the board. It is clearly stated that Palestinians will have to be relocated, and that it's not going to be easy. And the early Zionist settler terrorists were armed and trained by Britain, and there was definitely British monetary expectations and ulterior motives in this conquest. And it was a conquest. It was a partnership between Europe and the Zionists. It was a and the Arabian people of all countries, from Egypt to Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Yemen, UAE, Saudi Arabia, you name it, they knew that it was a British colonial state that was being formed. They had been there before. So a lot of cry wolf from Britain. And then when Britain pulled out and dropped it in the lap of the UN, one of the most ill-effective organizations on the planet right now, maybe it will change, especially if you look at how their resolution system is set up. It only takes one person representing one country to veto a vote 99-1, or in many cases 1 against 99. It's a completely baseless, ridiculous organization that was and still is in many ways just a glove for American empire and Britain as well. A sort of tokenism family gathering that only comes into play when America or Britain or Israel wants to achieve 100% vote and get what they need, what they want. But ultimately, the UN is not a body that Israel and the United States uses to get things done. They just go against the UN. That's their historical reputation. They just do whatever they want to do, unimpeded by the International Criminal Court, the International Criminal Justice System, The Hague, untouchable. They, even America, has baked into its laws the Hague Invasion Act, where if any official or soldier, military personnel, is ever arrested by the Hague and brought in on charges for trial, America has it in their laws that they have the right, that's a very loose word for what this is about. They have the right to invade the Hague and save their precious war criminal citizen. And so numerous presidents, including Barack Obama, are bona fide war criminals. And there's a huge list of war criminal presidents. You can look for it online. None of them have ever been convicted. And so just understand that the UN, about the only thing the UN is good for is showing people what it's not good for, and that it's a complete contradiction to its original mandate. And it's just a puppet and a propaganda creation. Looks like democracy, isn't. Similar to America, if not born in the shadowy alleyways of Jekyll Island. So, again, Israel, it was stated it would be a home, not a state. And it quickly became a statehood conquest. But it was sold at the beginning as a kind of a blending, if you will. But it quickly turned into what it was always meant to be, was an ethno-Jewish supremacy state. But you can't be Jewish and a supremacist as well. They cancel each other out. So whatever it is that a person feels that they are, and they say, well, I'm a Christian supremacist. Well, good luck with that, because that's not anything that's going to get you past purgatory or limbo. I mean, that's a complete and utter confusion, and that's like my private Idaho situation. It's between you, yourself, and your other self, because it just doesn't fly. You can't get away with that. That's just not doable. So you can carry the title and be in denial, and have that level of dissonant mental health issues, but ultimately when the pedal hits the metal, there's no gas in the tank. It just doesn't work. So it was an advertising scheme by the early Zionists to create this aura of Judaism that, although some of the highest ups were atheists and would care less about Judaism, they used it as a marketing ploy. America did the same with conquering Turtle Island, which is now the United States, with their divine mandate philosophy around it was somehow meant to be this new world. So Israel will end as it began, but in reverse. I mean, in the sense that, like all cults, it will eat itself. It will run out of enemies, or it will become so isolated that it will turn in on itself. And it's happening. I think Gaza and the mass slaughter and the inhumanity of it all, Israel is running out of corners to hide in. As far as the old tropes, Israel has the right to defend itself. In international law, that's not true. As an occupying force, the Palestinians are lawfully permitted to resist. And that's just the truth. So the Palestinian resistance is legal. And under international law, as an occupier, Israel is mandated to take care of the needs of those it occupies, which, of course, that's a complete joke. That's not happening. So just remember that this is also an ancestral conflict that involves the dead as well as the living. And they, at least without going into any kind of high-end theorizing or hypothesizing about the dead, we'll just keep it at the memory of, and that angst that you feel when you connect to an ancestral people and their unfinished business. How that happens is very mysterious. It's happened to me a few times in my life. It happened to me in Russia. It's happened to me with Palestine. It's a curious thing. I don't have a whole lot to say about it other than that it happens and that it's completely out of the blue. Like there's no pre-suggestion or history there. Like, well, you asked for it, here it is. It's not like that. it's completely out of left field. It occurs, and then it's upon you, and all you can do is try and integrate it and get familiar with it. Try and vibe it out and see what it's trying to influence, I guess you could say, or communicate, not communicate, but imply or what it's trying to accentuate. So it's getting late, so I'm my record player is skipping a little bit. So yeah, we'll keep going.
Was different. It was a political and nationalist movement that used historical Jewish narratives and biblical mythologies, as well as anti-Semitism, to justify colonization and create a Jewish state in Palestine at any cost.
They realized in order to get a lot of massive support from the world, evangelistic Christians, the Jews who don't know the Torah, don't know their laws, who don't practice the laws. So they knew they'll go to Palestine and they'll be able to tell everybody, oh, this is the God-given land to the Jewish people. They automatically started breaching and transgressing the laws of the Torah, not to kill and not to steal, not to oppress a people, because they wanted to make their national home in a land that was inhabited by the Palestinian people.
From the start, Zionism necessitated killing, stealing, and oppressing, actions that go against core Jewish teachings.
They declared themselves a Jewish state, and if anybody stood up against them, they said, because you hate the Jews and you're an anti-Semite.
When the ideology was put into action beginning in the late 19th century, Palestinians were killed and violently displaced, and
So this is a thing that maybe you hear people talk about, but not much because it's sort of taboo. I don't mind teasing it apart because I've dealt with it quite a bit, and so I promise I won't confuse you. So this whole defense about, well, if you criticize us for all this mass murder and genocide of innocents, you're being anti-Semitic. Well, I mean, hold on a minute here. Like, what's more important, not being anti-Semitic or not committing genocide? Like, what are you trying to say? Like, I mean, what kind of value system would, it's absurd. I mean, the level of arrogance and disconnect here is definitely fodder for an extreme mental health condition. It's a byproduct. It has to be a byproduct of mental health condition, because anyone who would equate being criticized for genocide and ethnic cleansing, that somehow not being anti-Semitic is more important than that. Like, how is that? That speaks for itself. If you can slow down your mind and your neurons exploding from the dissonance, if you can slow that stuff down and really think about it, it goes to show you that this is a self-centered, prepubescent mentality, like a kind of a crazy wisdom sort of thing, where you have gurus that will say silly things just to stop the mind. And then it gets old after a while, because you're like, well, okay, well, that's funny, or that's cute. Like, once a month is okay, But once it becomes a daily thing, you understand that that's all they've got, that there's no wisdom there. There's no, they just have these flippant, funny ways of creating dissonance that makes them seem supernatural or mystical, like, um, an icicle points to the direction of the drops. Like, just silly things that you're expecting more, but then you get the obvious, and somehow that impresses some uh, milligram of, well, I didn't think about that. That's kind of clever. But it's just silly. I mean, and so, well, silly is not the right word. It's monstrous, because you've got people who will sidestep criticizing Israel for being a brutal apartheid regime with thousands and thousands of illegally kidnapped. Not that you can kidnap someone legally, but what I'm getting at here is illegally detained, um, Palestinians languishing in prison, being tortured and starved, and the dead too. Israel keeps the dead as well, in cold storage and unmarked graves, as a form of collective punishment against their families, if they're still living, and if they're not, they they've achieved their goal in a sense. Um, Israel is, um, a very peculiar uh, experiment, but we've seen it before. It's cult. It's a cult mentality. It's Jim Jones, on steroids times a few million. Um, if you study what happened in Jonestown, it was like a little mini Israel. And when the governor came down there and bullets started flying, and um, Jones knew that trouble was coming and his ego was going to get defeated and he would look like a fool. And so rather than have all that happen and lose face, he convinced pretty much every follower, at least in the compound itself, to drink the Kool-Aid, including giving it to their kids. And it's a long, drawn out saga. But all I'm saying is that that's a cult, and Israel is also a cult. At least the 70 to 75% who support the ongoing genocide in Gaza and now Lebanon, and who think all Arabian people are, other than. So this is a very dangerous situation, and it's only. I mean, that's obvious. I'm not like revealing something that is some sort of secret. But what I'm getting at is, it started off extremely dangerous, and it's only gotten more dangerous as the years and decades go by. Um, and I guess we won't know how dangerous until it ends, and the lessons start rolling in, like World War II lessons. Not that the lessons from World War II stopped the Zionists from doing their genocide and having a very similar structure as Nazi Germany and the Third Reich. Fascism is fascism. There's not much nuance to it. Like there's only but so much creativity someone who chooses to be a fascist can do. I mean, if you're a fascist, you have a mental health condition, and you're not going to be reinventing the wheel anytime soon. Whatever's the easiest thing, that's what the fascist will do. And the easiest thing is to repeat the last fascist who did it. So yeah, it's rough. It's really rough. This whole compartmentalization going on with people who are in a privileged position to choose their self-image over having a conscience around genocide and mass ethnic cleansing and exile that's been going on since 1948 and previously as well, starting in the late 1920s. And total total denial. And so just something to keep in mind if you meet one of these people, that anyone in denial cannot make a sound judgment. It's just not possible. It's like trying to drive a car in heavy traffic in Houston, Texas, between the hours of 3:30 and 5:30 while staring at your belly button. So if you hit a brick wall, don't hit it again. If you meet someone like that, I mean, of course, unless you live with them, and that's a whole other different situation. But ultimately, change for that kind of person is only going to come from the inside, and all you can do is set a boundary, let them know that you're not condemning them, but that you're going to disengage and set boundaries and move forward, because arguing with someone who is limiting themselves from verifying their own suspicions or their own assumptions is there is no argument there. There is no real debate there. It's just feeding a money pit, so to speak.
Bush settlers seized their land and replaced them. There was no coexistence, only ethnic cleansing and control.
The Zionist movement and Israeli government being nothing but a settler colonial imperialist system that is trying to replace us with Jewish immigrants from outside, to kick us out of our country, to conduct ethnic cleansing.
In Zionism, total victory means no Palestinians and no resistance to colonization, land theft, Jewish supremacy, and total cultural erasure.
What is total victory? Within the realm of the framework of Zionism, total victory is ethnic cleansing. It's the completion of the genocide, the genocidal process that began in 1948, which can deliver them an ethno-religiously pure state free from these indigenous contaminants.
It starts early.
An ethno-pure religious state. Now think about that. So that's what I mean by mental health. That until human beings figure out a way to replace reasoning with or replace reaction with reasoning, and propaganda with principles, ethno-states with ethical states of mind, and Machiavellian with morals, it's not going to change. It will keep doing a chameleon thing, and because mental health is not something that changes on its own. Evolution doesn't do it any favors, just like disease, viruses. They keep mutating, and the last vaccine doesn't work because the virus is evolving. Same thing with mental health. If you don't do the hard work of verifying things and healing mental health, narrowing the avenues that the ego and the self can take to act out, then those avenues will just keep multiplying and getting more complex, deeper denial, deeper psychosis, deeper pathology, more ancestral baggage. The bones in the closet just get denser and denser, and it's same old dance, different record. And so you again, these, I mean, I would argue, and I'm using that word lightly because I'm not arguing it. I'm just saying that I would say that when you put two opposing phenomenons together inside the human mind, you create mental health issues, mental damage. The psyche is not built for that, and so it breaks, it gets distorted, and it morphs into exactly the aim and will that is doing the alchemy. So the psyche is like an amorphous material that becomes a tool of sorts. And that tool is neutral, but the nature of that tool is a reflection of the will and the being behind it. It gets a little tricky because the mind, in my opinion, is not me. It's the typewriter that I use to do a YouTube video. But if I choose through will to hold two opposing phenomenons in the mind, with the mind has its own laws, has its own needs. The mind doesn't need that, but you give it to it anyway, like a poison. And the mind will morph into that poison. And you will ultimately be under its effect. Because that's the typewriter you now have. So you take out the E key, and people are going to read what you're writing and think that you're talking gibberish because you're missing the E. So this whole idea of ethno-supremacy and religious, not possible. You can't have a supremacist psychology and be religious. So if you pretend that you're religious via hypocrisy, which is also a poison, you pretend to be religious while being a supremacist, you're in trouble. You're already in trouble. And then you live as trouble. Your lifestyle is trouble. Your quality of life may look good on the outside to other people who are in trouble, because, of course, misery loves company. But ultimately, you scratch the surface and it bleeds. It cannot weather the storm of reasoning, of facts. So that's why you have this extreme resistance in Israel right now, is that the surface is being scratched. It's easily scratched because it's a lie. It's a contradiction, and the contradiction is very easy to prove within 60 to 3 minutes, or 60 seconds to 3 minutes. If the person knows their history, and if the person knows their Judaic scripture and tenets. If they're a Zionist, good luck. The last Zionist I spoke to, it took me almost 4 hours to get to a reasonable level of conversation, but ultimately no breakthroughs occurred. Although the Zionists did say that it was a healing experience for them, whatever that means for a Zionist. But at least that happened. I mean, I don't have any expectations, but I guess it's hard for me to separate that from my other Zionist experiences as a whole. It's a very narcissistic enterprise, being a Zionist. It's not about being a member of humanity. Again, it's a cult, and cultists are not going to go to university and study sociology or how to become a humanitarian relief worker. So, and the kids, I mean, that's another huge situation. How these kids are indoctrinated. It's terrible. These kids grow up even worse mental health conditions than the parents who have adopted a hypocritical ideology, maybe in their 20s and 30s, depending on when they got to Israel, or where they're coming from. Adults who adopt the Zionist ideology is a completely different situation than children, because the children they are pure programmable Zionist weapons, and the kids are the worst of the settler terrorists in the West Bank. Israel's not that old. It's only like 77 years old. So you only have like maybe 2, maybe 3 generations there at the most. And so the kids are off the hook. The teenagers, brutal masochists and psychopaths, and rightly so, because they were programmed early on, and they have no faculties of juxtaposition. Like they can't choose a memory from a previous life of living in some European country and migrating to Israel and have a kind of a conversation with themselves and pick and choose what to believe, what to compartmentalize, what to deny, what to change and tweak and propagandize to themselves to get through the day, coping mechanisms, so on and so forth. The kids are just purely like rock on, you crazy diamond Zionist. Like it's no holds bar. And Ben Vagir arms these young teenagers with machine guns and pistols. So there you go. This is what you've got going on. Tip of the iceberg stuff.
Classrooms, history rewritten, symbols saluted, indoctrination over education.
And then when you get to high school, you start literally learning how to be a soldier already with the age of 16. Once you finish high school, you're supposed to quite immediately, as soon as possible, with 18, go to the army. It's obligatory. I don't even remember using the words Palestinians in school. Arabs was there, and they're always some kind of in a context of being our enemies, where I would say that the word closely to Palestinians, we have the word, so in the Bible it says Plishtim, so these were also our enemies. And then I think the connection that I would make as a kid, when I started hearing the word Palestinians,
So that's what I'm talking about religion. That the Bible and the Torah and other books out there doesn't do religion any favors as far as its core tenets when it promotes a psyche or an ego capable of making an entire people a monolithic target of projection. And so, see, even though this kid or young woman, that word that she's equating with Palestinians isn't the Palestinians, logically, right? She connected the two. Why not? You're in a cult. You don't have anything else better to do. Okay, that works. And so this is how the mind works with mythology. The mind and the ego, I should say probably ego more so than the mind. This is what the ego does. It will find a symbol that that no one can dispute because it's dead, it's gone, it's in history, locked away, cannot defend itself, can't say no, that's not what I'm about. And they adopt that as if, because it's old, it's legitimate, and then they apply it to a modern day group of people, an ethnic class of people. So it's religion is at best only for a mature adult. If you already have sound ethical and moral foundation, and you're a good person, and you're healthy and balanced, relatively speaking, and you can do without religion. You don't need it as a crutch or a coping mechanism, let's say. Your ego's not going to use it and abuse it. But if you just, with sound mind, you come to it and you adopt it as a vehicle of self-expression or a routine to discipline the mind and the heart, and you're dignified about it, great. Then you are in control. You can reason through it and filter out the propaganda and the egoic things and take away the core tenets. But this is not what happens with most religious movements and religious organizations. The autonomy of the individual is oftentimes considered heresy, curiously enough. So there's fascism in religion too. I mean, you only have to look as far as the Vatican to see that, and the mega churches of the evangelical Christian movement. Okay, here we go.
Connected it, the connotation was to these plishtim from the Bible who were our enemies. So you learn specifically about the heritage of Judaism, but it's all Zionism actually. And that's another thing as an adult that I had to relearn Judaism when I came out of Israel.
Today in Palestine's Gaza, the Zionist ideology is manifesting its most natural state, one of extreme, lawless brutality. Palestinians are being murdered, starved, and stripped of every basic right.
There is a genocide. They have killed 18,000 children. They have declared a full closure. Over the closure, no food, no water, no electricity, no fuel.
So just a little side note, Francesca Albanese, she has been an absolute Amazon warrior through this whole situation. And I'm surprised that Mossad has not situated her elsewhere. She must be either under heavy guard or just super, super intentional, like because Mossad is ruthless. They will go into a foreign country and they will take out people, and they have through this conflict. So just putting it out there that she is incredible. She has been at the forefront, banging on the doors of dignity for years. And if there is such a thing as karma, the amount of unpaid karma that she has recorded by just being denied by those in power is in the hundreds of trillions. Because she just lays it out. She tells the truth. She's very, very clear speaker. She doesn't pontificate. She doesn't get into her interpretations of things or philosophizing about things. She stays on point. She's incredibly razor sharp, and the ego can't touch it. Its hand falls off as soon as it reaches out. She is that sharp. So a lot of handless clappers for Israel are running around out there because of her. And yeah, I mean, just the feminine, like the matriarchy. I feel like she's a good model for the kind of energy and balance and strength which is needed to bring in a new era of a revolution of sorts. And she's modeling it really well, I feel. This, her anima and animus, as Carl Jung would say, is very balanced. The strength of her masculine hero and the warmth and compassion and passion of her feminine, they've merged, and it's pretty incredible dance.
Determination to punish the Palestinian people, to target the Palestinian people, this might lead to creating the conditions of life that would be physical and biological destruction for Palestinians.
On each gurney was 3 to 5 kids, almost exclusively kids. 90% of our new admissions were kids. And there'd be 15, 20 kids coming in at the end of every bombing. A third were dead by the time they got to us. A third would die in front of us. And a third we'd take to the operating room. And most of them would die.
So I want to memorialize this shot. This man has been broken. Not his heart, but everything else. His heart is the only thing he has left. And I figure it's barely holding on. But the world has failed, especially the Middle East world. Those in power, Turkey, Jordan, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, all enablers for this genocide. Those who have stood up and lost their own people by standing up, Yemen, Lebanon, Iran, they're not included on this list that I'm speaking about. The Jordanians, the Egyptians, those in Dubai, those in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. I'm not including Afghanistan and Iraq in this. The Turkish, yes, there were protests, but ultimately the government, Turkey, kept pumping oil to Israel. It's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable that that no one stepped in militarily to stop this genocide, and including NATO. NATO didn't do anything either, because the United States owns NATO ultimately, and the UN can't because it has no military. And the ICJ and ICC, they are completely impudent. their laws are not enforceable by military or police. So this man, the look on his face, think about what he's experiencing. This is a chapter in his life. Not that I know the book of his life. I mean, maybe he's been a war surgeon his whole life. But just for the sake of this conversation, we'll say that it's a chapter. It's not a lifestyle, like something that he's used to day in and day out. So think about the level of desperation and hopelessness that he's feeling, that his heart has been full up thousands of times and multitudes of times with the same patient, from life to struggle to death and burial, if Israel allows it, or if they don't blow up the funeral while you're having the burial. Imagine that level of distress in a Palestinian father, starting at the age of, say, 20, through his entire adult life up until, say, 40s or 50s, every day. And then think about October 7th. And then you can join those two as cause and effect. It wears on a person. It changes a person. It makes you something else. And I wouldn't say it makes you inhuman, and I wouldn't say it makes you human. It's not about morals. This is where the human mind and the identity as a human starts to get abstract and kind of weird, where there are people who demonstrate pure elemental being. Like everything else is gone. There's no context. The human character or role has disappeared. And you might say that whatever it is, the ka, the soul, the spirit, whatever you want to call it, it has hyper accelerated itself out of the human construct for a moment. For a short snippet, it has become a kind of mythological being. Like when people lose their minds or do something from a point of view of no view. Like there's I'm not going to get into it tonight because it needs a lot of like layering and contextual building up to making the point. But the gist of it is that human beings don't take it for granted because it's a very, for the most part, it's a stable context that you're in. You're good. You're not going to wake up and think you're a grizzly bear or a frog. It's a pretty stable construct, but there are mental stresses that if you keep pressing like the Zionist regime does on the masculine and the feminine, on dignity itself, you keep torturing dignity, you take a human being's dignity away, their self-respect, no matter how much, no matter what the ego's up to, self-respect is self-respect. That's a very private affair. Like that's the holy of holies. Even if the self that you respect is not a respectful self, doesn't matter. Self-respect it cannot be judged from the outside. It is an internal affair. You take that away, now you're asking for trouble. Big, weird trouble. Because then the spirit within, the psyche, has all kinds of interesting things to choose from. Because now you've relieved it of all things human. And what that implies is that humanness doesn't mean anything anymore. Only emotion and payback. It becomes it creates itself through pure emotion, pure distress. And it becomes a warrior of that emotion, a hero, not of a god or an angel or some deity or a Borg from a cube hanging in space. It becomes a warrior of an emotion. And then that's it. And ultimately, the human construct is just leaves in the wind at that point. The idea of self-preservation is preposterous, because the hero of an emotion, its weapon is its body. Hence the suicide bombers of early PLO resistance. When you get to that level of self-sacrifice, you're demonstrating that something has been done to you, that you've been robbed of your human construct, and you're demonstrating what's underneath that construct. Unbridled emotion with will, reason, and ironclad determination. And that's where you get into like the elementals of the psyche, like the stuff that people interpret and write philosophical dissertations about and use in different contexts. But you take away the human construct, those elementals have a life of their own. They're going about their business. And when they see that you're free and clear of the human construct, oh boy, it's baklava for everybody. So yeah, that's my take on it.
No kid gets shot twice by mistake by a sniper. It doesn't happen by mistake. They were deliberately targeted. And that's not beyond a war crime. That's targeted assassinations. And it helps me formulate my opinion of what's really occurring in Gaza.
How is this genocidal system flourishing? Billions in US aid, year after year.
I think there's not only an effort within the military and our government institutions, but it's an effort by the media, by our executive branch, legislative branch. I mean, even local state governments. I think every institution at this point has a level of corruption that keeps us censored to the truth and reality of what's actually happening. Fox News, CNN, even MSNBC, all of these news organizations have been censoring the truth.
Netanyahu hasn't been condemned by the American government.
So Fox News, CNN, ABC, NBC, MNBC, if that's the right abbreviation, the BBC, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, all of them are cult propagandists. And they've already factored in resistance. They've done this before for George Bush around 9/11. And so they know that America is not a scholar-based country, that education and educating yourself as a citizen, I'm not talking about Lord of the Rings or some other trilogy or a trade or something like this, or the history of the Dallas Cowboys. I'm talking about, like, it's not in the American cultural idiom, not yet, to be educated in general about world things, about critical thinking, debate, constructive criticism, analysis, psychoanalysis, forensic psychology, forensic journalism. It's not part of its self image or sense of self, and so it knows that 90 to 95%, basically, whoever doesn't vote, they've got by the balls, and a lot of people don't vote, and so that's the only people that they're feeding this propaganda gruel to, and they know it. And of course, the advertisers also know it. And so when it comes down to accountability someday, when the pedal hits the metal and people start looking for those who are accountable, remember that it's not only Fox and NBC and ABC and all these other, but it's also their advertisers, the people who are enabling and supporting those organizations through their capitalist gains and advertising, that are also responsible. So the Raytheon is responsible, but also their shareholders are responsible. And whoever is dead and buried, they're also responsible. So, and their lineage, the people who are still getting dividends from all the Gulf War and Afghanistan slaughters and whatever they're still siphoning from that region and stole and extorted. So, yeah.
Government hasn't sanctioned Netanyahu. In fact, they have doubled down.
One telephone call can stop all wars. Israel cannot thrive without American taxpayer paid for bombs. That's all it would take.
Meanwhile, 1.25 million Palestinians face catastrophic hunger in Gaza.
So I get what he's saying. Taxpayer bombs. I get that. But at the same time, it's a bit more dubious than that, like that depth. I mean, yes, that would make a huge impact, and yet there's more that would need to happen, and it's happening now, irregardless of the bombs not being taken away. And that is that Israel is a cult, a heavily armed cult with nuclear warheads. So if America was to sanction them, completely pull out, I can guarantee you, absolutely guarantee you, that Israel would use its nuclear armaments as leverage to get weapons and support, or else. Absolutely guarantee it. So then America would have to either send in black ops to take out the leadership and try and figure out how to pull the regime down before all that went down. They would probably foresee it. They'd probably do a black op operation first and then pull out the support and put the sanctions in. That would be the smart thing to do. But let's just say that Trump isn't smart. And he pulled out support, then that would ratchet down the snake swallowing its tail even harder. And Israel would undoubtedly leverage their nuclear warheads, which they have in stock underground and in submarines, about 180, 200 of them, all different versions, not just intercontinental, but they've got, sea to land, land to sea, there's all different shapes and sizes. And I wouldn't put it past Israel to launch one on a uninhabited island off the coast of somewhere close to America, just as a kind of like a thank you very much, I see you seeing me seeing you kind of a gesture. They've mentioned it to Europe before, that just in case you're thinking about messing around with our project, our ICBMs can reach you, and they alluded to their nuclear weaponry. And so I have it somewhere on my computer, the little newspaper article from like the 50s or 60s, I think it is, that when maybe it was when Kennedy was pushing hard on the Zionist regime to recognize the Palestinians. I'm not sure, but every once in a while, Israel will remind Europe that it separated from Britain a long time ago. It's its own form of European colonialism now. That it doesn't owe Europe any kudos for its tutorage.
Aid remains blocked. Families are starving.
This dictatorship, they really have no limits, and if they could, they would starve all the Palestinians to death. And actually what they tried to do for 20 months, they destroyed all the aid system, they destroyed the water sewage system, they destroyed all the capacity of the Palestinian people to remain alive in that region.
Over in Palestine's occupied West Bank, apartheid defines daily life.
I don't have any right, in the contrary of the Israeli settlers who live close to my house illegally. They have more rights than me in my own neighborhood. They are under the Israeli civilian law with full civilian rights and political rights. And we, the Palestinians who are living, in our land, we don't have any rights. Basic rights we don't have. We don't have enough water, enough electricity.
But Palestinians refuse to leave. Staying is resisting. Resistance against a system that silences and suppresses an entire people.
Well, okay, so that's a little I mean, if you don't know the history, you that might be mistaken as propaganda, that the Palestinians refused to leave. Um, for the most part, statistically, they can't leave. Egypt has barred them. There's no way Egypt is going to allow a mass migration voluntarily, a mass migration or exile into Egypt. And Lebanon, I'm not altogether sure of their position, but with Israel's suspicions and still fighting Hamas in the world's largest open air cemetery, Israel has blockades around Gaza for, quote, security reasons. And so ultimately, Gaza, of course, it's flanked by a wall and a Zionist apartheid regime behind it with guns, and the ocean and the sky and tunnels underground. And ultimately, they're trapped, and they've always been trapped. Gaza has been a concentration camp for a long time. It almost became the West Bank, but it was too dense to do what they've been doing in the West Bank since 48, basically, because the West Bank is spread out into municipalities and small settlements and farms and orchards and olive groves and such. It's more spacious, and so they can roll up one township at a time. But Gaza was dense and heavily populated to begin with. So they couldn't do the same thing. They tried, and then the military had to come in and forcibly remove like high-level zealot Zionist settlers. That might be a bit redundant, being a zealot and a Zionist, but it sounded good. Here we go.
Palestinians are staying and remaining because for us, it's about that remaining in the land is a kind of resistance. And we call it all the time, existence is resistance.
We mobilize to stop the genocide. We mobilize to defeat Zionism, to defeat imperialism, to create a better society for every human being and every being on this planet. It's our task to do so.
The Zionists ignoring everything about the Jewish belief. In the Jewish belief, the state of Israel will conquer it 100%.
Zionism.
So, I want to talk to what he last said about building a better future. And I mean, we've heard that. I didn't personally, but that was said after World War II and probably after World War I too. It's like with the Holocaust and Israel and the Nazis, this slogan, never again. Well, how did that work out? Not too well, because apparently never again is exclusive to one particular culture or ethnic class of people, and that does not mean they can't do it to someone else. So this operation of displaced vengeance and acquisition of some utopian coping mechanism to make them feel like they have something, it has been a failed project since the beginning, because ultimately, again, it goes back to the mind. And that's why I think holy books will say, don't worship idols. It creates mental health issues. The only idol, and I think religion understood this, but I'm talking about, I feel, primordial religion, shamanism, not religion where the inner little voice that speaks to you has been externalized and turned into some dude up in the sky or in some quadrant of the Pleiades. At one time, in case this helps, people thought that the little voice inside your head that speaks, I think everyone has one, right? At least one. They thought that was God. That was the customary belief, that little voice was God. Well, look how things have changed. Now, there's emissaries of that little voice. That's not, now it's the doubt that God's in there, contextual to you, autonomous and reserved for you and you alone, and also reserved for billions of other people in their individualism alone. Well, that can't be capitalized on. That can't be exploited and corralled and turned into group consciousness. That's too complex. That's not marketable. You can't design a Ford F-150 for every citizen that wants a truck. That would require an assembly line for each individual. Can you imagine? Like, well, I want my F-150 to have 6 seats, not a bucket seat. Well, we've made 25,000 of these trucks and we've never made one with 6 seats. Well, too bad. You're going to have to build a multi-million-dollar assembly line to make this thing into what I want. Okay, well, we'll do that. It's not going to happen. And so you, in many ways, organized religion sacrificed the individual, the autonomy of the individual. Me, as an adult, you can go off on your own and still have kind of a dual allegiance to an existentialist opinion of religion and still go to church for social reasons and for a kind of relativity, let's say, so that you don't get too caught up in your own bubble. But ultimately, it's yeah, the little voice and the primordial God, like the shamanism side of things. There's a truth there. There's something baseline that I feel will need to bring up to date, let's say, because it lives in all cultures, and simplify things so that they cannot be misinterpreted or misrepresented so easily. Religion isn't complex. The worshiper is complex, and the ego that gets involved in there makes it even more complex and illegible. So I'm barely hanging on. Thank you, folks, for listening and supporting this channel. Please give a like and share. I'm welcoming anyone and everyone. Please leave a comment if you wish. And if you want to hear anything around a particular subject, feel free to reach out. And I thank you. And on a side note, the lip syncing going on here, it's a little off, like by a second. I'm fooling around with settings in my my platform that I'm using, and I'm trying to dial it in. I'm doing my best. I even got rid of the commercials by going YouTube Premium, so got that taken care of. No more commercials, and other than me breaking in and making comments. Research, educate your anger, educate your angst, educate your assumptions, your interpretations. Try not to hold on to portraits that you've painted in the dark of people. It's much more brave and courageous and true to meet them in person and confront your suspicions and your imaginations. Otherwise, that energy of not doing that simply makes you a kind of well, let's say you make a pillowcase for a pillowcase, or a blanket to keep a blanket warm, or as a Christmas present you give a boulder a rock. So it's a redundancy. It's a feedback loop that will eventually self-sabotage you and turn you into a rather selfish, dysfunctional situation, which is not good for anybody. So it's good to take your journalism into real life as well and be brave. You have nothing to lose but an imaginary picture that is neither a gift or necessarily a curse. It's just a tool for avoiding, and there's an opportunity there. And if you really watch your day to day, and you go down the bullet list of things that you've said and done, and you apologize for the things that you know you could have done better, and you make eye contact when you do it, things will change. But it takes noticing. If you don't notice these disjunctures, then it just becomes a kind of a routine lifestyle of being a professional roadblock to getting out of your own driveway. Thank you again, and good night.